Let's have a look at measurement conversions. Let's have a look first at length conversions. So if you look on your ruler, it will already tell you the conversion between millimeters and centimeters. You will see that there are 10 millimeters in every centimeter. You might also know that there are 100 centimeters in a meter. In fact, the word cent, like century or cents and around, is an indication that it's 100. Milli is an indication that it's 1,000, but so is kilo, because to go from a meter to kilometers, the conversion is 1,000. So there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. But now, knowing when to divide and when to multiply can be quite confusing. So think of it this way. There are 10 millimeters in 1 centimeter. Therefore, 10 is a lot and 1 is little. So going from millimeters to centimeters, I need to divide by 10. Going from centimeters to meters, there's 100 centimeters in 1 meter. Therefore, I divide when I go from centimeters to meters. And from meters to kilometers, there are 1,000 meters in 1 kilometer. Therefore, I divide by 1,000 when I go to kilometers. So when I go from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, I multiply because there's lots of the smaller unit inside the bigger units. Let's do a few examples to help you out with this idea. If I need to go from centimeters to millimeters, I know that there will be more millimeters in centimeters. Therefore, I need to multiply. So from centimeters to millimeters, I need to multiply by 10, which gives me 67 millimeters. But then if I go from millimeters to centimeters, it means that I will have to divide. So here I'm going to divide by 10 and get a fraction of 0,8. Meters to kilometers, so from a smaller unit of measure to a bigger unit of measure means I will need to divide. So here I'm going to divide by 1,000 because there are 1,000 meters in a kilometer, and that will give me 0,4. When I go from a bigger unit of measure, kilometers, to meters, I will multiply again. So here I'm going to multiply by 1,000, which will give me 59,000 meters in 59 kilometers. From meters, a bigger unit of measure, to a smaller unit of measure, I will once again multiply. So from meters to centimeters, a bigger unit of measure to a smaller unit of measure, I'm going to multiply by 100. So that gives me 8,000 centimeters. And in the last example, going from a small measure of unit to a bigger unit of measure, that means I'm going to divide. So 5 centimeters is just a little fraction of a meter, namely 0,05 meters. So really practice going forwards and backwards here, multiplying and dividing so that you don't accidentally mix the two up. Capacity conversions, meaning liters, milliliters, and kiloliters, work in a similar way. Milli and kilo, once again, meaning 1,000. So if you go from milliliters to liters, you divide by 1,000. If you go from liters to kiloliters, you divide by 1,000. And then, of course, the reverse if you go from the bigger unit of measure to the smaller unit of measure. You might also see on some measuring jugs that you might have in the kitchen that they show 1 liter is 1,000 ml and half a liter is 500 ml. So if you're a keen baker, you might be very familiar with these measurements. So let's try them out here. If I need to go from kiloliters to liters, it means I go from a bigger unit of measure to a smaller unit of measure. Therefore, I need to multiply by 1,000. In case you don't know, kiloliters is also the unit of measure which we use to look at our water usage on a monthly basis. So your parents will get a bill or a municipal statement stating how many kiloliters of water they used per month. This can be quite substantial, and especially now that we're in a water restrictive season, we need to be very careful of how many kiloliters we use per month. So if 1 kiloliter is 1,000 liters, it means that half a kiloliter would be half of 1,000, which is 500 liters. Okay, let's try the reverse. If we need to go from 2,000 liters to kiloliters, I go from a smaller unit of measure to a bigger unit of measure, meaning I need to divide. So this will give me 2 kiloliters. Even in the next one, 500 divided by 1,000, so here I will get half a kiloliter. Mass works exactly the same way. The liters, so instead of liters we will have grams, and then instead of milliliters, milligrams, and kiloliters we will have kilograms. So once again, it's 1,000, 1,000. If you go from the smaller unit of measure to the bigger one, you divide, and when you go from the bigger unit of measure to the smaller one, you multiply. So for this specific question, I would like to now include ratios in the question. So once again, let's consider a baking example. If you need 5 kilograms of flour for every 1 kilograms of margarine, it means that you have a ratio of 5 to 1. And I also like to write the little words there for myself, flour to marge. So now if we need to answer the questions, it says, what is the weight of the mixture if a baker mixed 5 kilograms of flour with 1 kilogram of margarine? Very simple. 5 plus 1 would give me 6 kilograms. If a baker wants to bake 60 kilogram mixture, how many times would he need to make the above mixture? Well, to get from 6 kilograms to 60 kilograms, we multiplied by 10, meaning that both the flour and the margarine would need to be multiplied by 10. So that is what they ask in the next question. They ask how much flour would you need, and that would be 50 kgs. And how much margarine would you need, and that would be 10 kgs. And together, that gives me the 60 kgs, which I worked with in question B. The last question is when they start working with grams, and here it gets a little bit complicated because now the ratio and the conversion questions get mixed together. So if Cecile had 500 grams of margarine in the fridge, how much flour would she need? Once again, I'm still working with a ratio of 5 to 1. This is my flour and this is my marge. They are saying that she has 500 grams of margarine. So I'm writing my 500 grams underneath the margarine. And either you can do the divide up times down method, or you can just see that in actual fact there is a multiplication here of 500 grams on the right, which means I need to multiply by 500 on the left, giving me 2,500 grams. Now this seems quite a lot, but if I convert this to kilograms, and I do this by dividing by 1,000, I will get 2.5 kilograms. So this example here is really just showing how we mix conversions into ratio questions and how ratio questions get mixed into conversion questions. So let's summarize quickly. Did you notice that in each case we have meters, grams, and liters? This is then divided by 1,000 in each case to get kilometers, kiloliters, and kilograms. The grams, liters, and meters can also be divided by 1,000 to get millimeters, milliliters, and milligrams. In case you missed that for the meters, remember that dividing by 100 and then dividing by 10 is the same than saying dividing by 1,000. Similarly, multiplying it by 1,000 will get us to meters. So remembering that meters, grams, and liters work in the same way, it's very easy to then convert it to kilometers, kilograms, and kiloliters, as well as millimeters, milligrams, and milliliters. So for those of you that are keen bakers, you will know that 1 cup is 250 mils, and that half a cup is half of 250, which is 125. But now things get a little bit complicated when we start working with a third, a quarter, and an eighth cup. Let me explain. If 1 cup equals 250 mils, and that's the same than saying half a cup, because it's the same ratio, is 125 mils, then it means that a quarter cup must be half of 125, which is 62.5 moles. But now in most measuring instruments, you will see that a quarter cup is 60 moles. So what happened here? Rounding. Because it is very difficult to measure 2.5 milliliters, and therefore they've rounded it to the nearest 10, so that you can only measure 60 moles instead of 62.5 moles. Therefore, if I look at an eighth cup, they didn't half this again to 31.25 moles, but it was rounded off to 30 moles, which is just half of the 60 moles. So for practical reasons, both these cup measurements were rounded off, the eighth cup and the quarter cup. Something interesting to note is that 250 milliliters of pure water is the same than 250 grams of water. So it means that those measurements of grams and milliliters are the same when it comes to water. It is, however, not the same when we look at flour or milk or even sugar. So although you would not be asked to remember these, just take this into consideration. If you go into the kitchen and you need to measure off a cup of flour, that is not 250 grams, it's 120.5 grams. And if you need to measure a cup of milk, it's actually a bit more than 250. And if you need to measure a cup of sugar, it's a little bit less than 250. So those of you that have a coffee percolator at home, I know these are not seen that often anymore, might have noticed that they show cups on the sides, big cups and small cups. I'm sure in your home as well, you have mugs and cups, and they're not necessarily the normal 250 mils which we use in baking. So this specific coffee machine says that it's got a capacity, which means it can take water, up to 3.6 liters. Now, knowing what my conversions from previously, I can start by saying that 3.6 liters would be 3,600 milliliters. I converted to milliliters to see how much would be in each cup. On the drawing, they indicate that it can make 12 big cups. So if I need to see what the size of a big cup is, I can say 3,600 mils divided by 12 cups. And this will give me a cup size of 300 mils, which I think in this case is more of a mug than a cup. Now, looking at the smaller ones over here, we can also work out what the smaller size would be. So 3,600 mils divided by 18 cups. And in this case, I get 200 mils, which sounds more like the size of a teacup or a smaller coffee cup. So remember that when they speak about cups, that it's not always 250 mils, but it can also refer to a smaller coffee cup or a bigger coffee mug.